Thank you, Josh, for that introduction. Sort of. I got to get out of the direct spotlight here. So I'm actually not part of the catering crew. I spilled coffee on my shirt earlier, and you know, in the restrooms they have those hurricane hand dryer things. So one of my There I Was stories, there I was in the men's room drying my clothes with the hand thing, thinking, you might be a redneck if you're drying your clothes in a restroom hand dryer while you're wearing them. So maybe. Oh, what were we talking about? Oh, breaking news from the Olympics. Heard this morning. Ski jumpers were disqualified because their suits were a little too baggy. I don't really see the issue. Maybe the Eastern European entry was a little over the top, but it takes care of that. We're going to talk about a couple different things. First, I was going to do a recognition. I'll talk about that and kind of review some of the things we said at the past migration discussions. And then I want to talk about a subject that's serious, although I may not take it that way. It really is the great fail of flight training, what we can do about it. And there is an unapologetic self-promotion sort of at the end, but I'll prompt you on that so you can tune out if you like. So I had this discussion to talk about one of the journalists that usually comes to migration, and I had a lot of nice things to say about him, you know, Huntley and Brinkley, you know, straight shooter, gets to the facts and whatnot, and I was going to recognize him for his years of straight forward reporting, and then he didn't show up. So all the nice thing I was going to say about Paul Bertorelli, I take it all back, and now we can move on. Things we've talked about in the past. I always feel like I'm preaching to the people in the front row. Typically, people who come to one of these situations, they're not really the kind of the target audience for the things I'm going to complain about. So I know it doesn't apply to you guys, all right? So you guys are okay, and nothing I'm going to say applies to you, unless, of course, it does. And then we'll talk about that. Now, the past migrations have included titles like Your Customers Are Failing, It's Your Fault, The Earth is Flat, and other stupid stuff my CFI told me. How to understand Texans. Well, we used to have this in Texas. It was important that anybody visiting the state knew how to use the singular and plural use of the word y'all. And when it was important that you had to go from all y'all to y'all, and unless you could do that, you couldn't go out and actually eat at any of the restaurants. So we prepped you on that. We prepped you about the things you'll never hear in Texas, like honey, don't feed that to the dog, and you know, other things, but we're here in Florida now. We also talked about how to build a simulator-centric program and how you can successfully train a private pilot in 2 weeks using that program, how to hire flight instructors. We've talked a lot about that in the past, and how to advantageously depreciate your aircraft and your simulators so that it's a tax advantage, and more importantly, how to get others to buy those training aircraft and simulators for you, okay, because it's a tax advantage for them. And of course, we talked about why everything in The Wizard of Oz was true except for maybe one thing, and we'll talk about that later. I was recently asked by somebody, I was doing a series of check rides at a university, and the chief flight instructor came out and he said, hey, I want to open my own flight school, what should I do? My first recommendation was a comprehensive mental evaluation. And if you failed it, we can move forward with the next points. First, get a reliable, supportable trainer. Your second airplane needs to be an MCX. Your third, a pair of TDs, and hire CFIs on attitude. I've said a lot of nasty things about CFIs, and you know, I don't apologize, and I'm not going to stop. But the point is, you know, if you expect them to be really good teachers right off the bat, I think you're mistaken, so you might as well hire people you like to be around. So we'll keep it on there. And stay small and stay focused and be the highest priced school in the area. And I want to talk about that just a little bit. Get a reliable trainer. Oh, a while ago, Redbird did this trainer, and right now if I said, hey, how would you like a refurbed 172 with every nut, bolt, screw replaced and a Mercedes-Benz turbo diesel engine? You're going to get 125 knots on 4 gallons of Jet A. Would you buy it for $200,000? And the answer is probably would. Too late. So why did that technology pass it by? Well, I like to talk about the total drag curve. There was a little drag from the owner because it was new. You know, the CFIs, they were uncomfortable about teaching with it because they had this thing called FADAC, you know, and if we teach people to fly an airplane with FADAC, then how can they possibly learn to fly anything else? I mean, it's kind of the CFI attitude, but we can move up. The factory had some support problems, but not really for us. And of course, then there was a lot of drag from the A&Ps because, oh my God, you had to buy a set of metric wrenches. So that was never going to happen. Yeah, I said it, but that's okay. Now your second airplane needs to be an MCX, and I'm serious about this. It's a better device to introduce the new schools. Forgive me if I'm talking too fast. I just don't want to get in the way of your next cookie. Okay, so get you into the breakout session and into some sugar. Better place to practice the challenging tasks that you have, like short field, crosswind, and obviously emergencies. And paired with GIFT and now Pro, it's a better and more consistent way to introduce all the flight tasks. I want to say that again. It's a better and more consistent, standardized way to introduce the flight task because the machine's going to do it for you. And if you don't like the way the machine is teaching it, you can change that. And of course, build a simulator-centric program so that your customers are actually mastering the skills they need in the airplane in the simulator before they ever get there. And you'd be amazed at how much anxiety goes away, at how fast they progress, how happy they are, and of course, it's really cost-effective for them. And by the way, if you're a 141 school, you can build a simulator-centric program that requires no airplane hours for a private pilot. And if you say, well, how do you do that? Well, talk to me afterwards, but I have a syllabus that's got an FAA stamp on it that says you can. So imagine that as a marketing advantage to you to when you say to people, hey, you can get your private pilot certificate. How long will it take me in the airplane? Instead of quoting them the cost of 40 hours or 35 hours in the airplane, you can say, well, statistically or historically, we're doing about 30 hours in the airplane, about 20 hours in the sim, and here's what the total cost was. Huge marketing advantage for you. And I said your third airplane needs a pair of TDs, and the reason is your MCX is going to be busy so much, you're going to have an alternative to do it. And of course, the TDs can do much of the work that the MCX can. And you can eliminate some of your flight instructor time and get them in the airplane where they belong. And be the most expensive school in the area. When I was with that other company that sold airplanes, we talked about this at our meetings. You need to set yourself apart, and it isn't by lowering your prices. You need to sell the quality of your operation. You need to sell the value of your simulator technology, and you need to sell the success rate of your operation. And if I didn't mention it before, you need to sell the value of your simulator technology and how that's going to be an advantage to someone who's learning to fly. So what if the simulator program could deliver the instruction you need to learn a flight task, deliver the correct feedback for common errors, didn't care about flight hours to get to the airlines? I'll say that again. That's as harsh as I'm going to be on flight instructors today. And what if your CFIs that you hire really don't have to be that good at instructing because they're learning all the basic tasks somewhere else? Now, simulation has been around for a really long time, but it's only been used and accepted in instrument instruction. And I'm really not sure why. Let's look at ground schools. Before we used to have the ground school, and the old fat bald guy would stand up there, and you had to go every Tuesday and Thursday night for 3 hours and listen to that guy, and it was the least effective way to transmit the information you needed to learn or to pass the test. Now, eventually, people came out with programs. First of all, they started out on VHS tapes, and then they went to CD, and now they're live streaming. And if anybody is still teaching traditional ground schools, they're doing it because it's in an academic environment and it needs to count for course hours. But it's certainly not the most effective way to do it because these people can't put the time, resource, and money into developing a really first-class program. And you're relying on the instructor to be really good, which in some cases it isn't going to happen. So hopefully those are gone. So we've accepted that maybe this now distance learning is a good idea. And the question for you guys to answer before you leave here is, why aren't they being used universally for all basic flight maneuvers, not just instrument? Okay, and it's a total drag curve again. The owners say, well, that sounds like a good idea. The A&P says, that sounds like a good idea because you're not going to break my airplanes as much. But where does the feedback come from? And Josh talked about that. It comes from the CFI. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons CFIs don't want to teach in the simulator, and we won't go into those, but we all know what they are. And by the way, if you're a CFI out there, I'm not in any way insulting you. I'll just tell you that what you think your job and what the owner thinks your job is are two entirely different things. Okay? Different perspective on different objectives, both of the way. Okay. But now I want to talk about the great fail, and of course it's an important topic. By the way, that's the link for it. All these statistics I'm going to talk about, I didn't make them up like all the other stuff I made up. Okay, this comes from the FAA and it's available to you. They hide it on this thing called a website, but you can find it. Okay? 25% of the people who test for their private pilot certificate fail. And you say, well, there's a lot of people who drop out. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about those who started and quit. That number is 60%. 60% of the people who start training, that is, who got a student pilot certificate, don't go on to get their private pilot certificate. That was 330,000 people over the 10-year period between 2010 and 2020. There's a lot of reasons for that, and of course somebody said earlier in a very nice way that flight schools suck at marketing, and people can help you with that, but that's a bad enough figure. Let's go back to this one. 25% of the people who paid their money, finished their training, and were signed off by an FAA certificated flight instructor failed that flight test. That's over 33,000 in the past 5 years. I can't think of another industry or educational system where we would consider that acceptable. Certainly it wouldn't be my surgeon, my dentist, okay, or even the person who took my order at a restaurant. If every fourth order they brought out to the table was wrong, how long would they last in that situation? So, I've complained about it. Let's talk about what we can do about it. Well, first of all, awareness. So how many aviation writers do we have in the room? Raise your hand. Go ahead. I won't call on you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. You should be publishing something about this in your magazine. Consumers need to be aware of the fact that schools have different pass rates and that the consumer needs to ask for that because it's an important part about whether they will complete their training or will do it successfully. And consumers need to understand the value of advanced simulator-assisted learning in helping them pass that test at the end of the time. Because I don't care who you are. All pilots are either AAA, AA, or at least the laid-back ones, an A personality. And failure is failure. And of course, even though we know that you can fail a flight test and you can come back the very next day and pass it, it is really awkward for someone on the other side of the table to watch a grown man cry. Okay? And it isn't because, hey, I'm not going to pass it. Sure enough, they're going to pass it sooner or later. But all their hopes and dreams and all their personalities said, I'm going to do this the first time. And when they don't, it's really hard. So, now, how many CFI groups do we have out there? Go ahead, you can raise your hand. You should be screaming at the top of your lungs about this problem. Okay? We have in the CFI community a professional responsibility to self-regulate, or else the government's going to do it for you. And I have a suggestion for you. You groups should petition the FAA to require a re-examination of any CFI whose pass rate falls below 80%. I'll let that sink in for a second. Yeah, I said it, and I'll say it again just to make sure, because I'm often misquoted, so I want to make sure we get this point. Petition the FAA to require any CFI whose pass rate falls below 80% to be re-examined. And you say, well, it can't be done. Well, of course it can. It's just an administrative rule. I mean, you can renew your CFI by going with a DPE and doing a flight just as well as you can do it in a FERC, et cetera. Okay? You can do it with designees, hopefully just not the one you did it the first go-around, because that may be defeating the point. But should it happen? Sure it should. And we should demand it happen for the consumers. Is that too radical? Okay, if it is, I'll give you a way out of this. What if every other CFI renewal had to be with a flight test with the DPE? So once every 4 years, you actually have to get in an airplane and demonstrate that you can still fly and teach. Okay. Would that be so hard? And you say, well, it's a whole lot of time and money. And say, okay, so you'd rather sit 16 hours in a either self-paced or a ground school rather than going out and flying for about an hour, which you do all the time, with somebody to prove that you can do this job. Right? Now, I hear a lot of objections to this kind of philosophy. One is, I don't do any instruction anymore. I just like to keep my CFI. I'm not saying you can't keep your CFI. That card, nobody's going to come in the middle of the night and take it away from you. It just won't be current. Okay? You can still keep it. Put it on your wall. I don't fly anymore. I only give ground instruction. Well, good for you. You recognize that maybe this isn't the stage in your life where you need to be flying or you can't stay current, so I'm going to do ground. That's great. That's why they have these ground instructor certificates. And by the way, that's going to become really important if the FAA recognizes the recommendations that the working group have said about separating the test into two distinct pieces. One is the ground portion and one is the flight portion. Because if you say that there's going to be a ground portion, like in an ATP test, by the way, it's two separate deals, the ground and the flight, then why in the world couldn't a ground instructor sign off that person to take the ground portion of the practical test? So you can still have a very valuable contribution to the community, even if you don't want to fly. Okay. And last, I only keep my CFI to give my friends flight reviews. Well, there's so much wrong with that statement that I don't even want to go into it, but this is indicative of some of the problems we have in the industry. So, and then people ask me, what's going to happen if they just can't pass the reinstatement? What are they going to do? Well, something else, I hope. But they shouldn't be in a professional organization being inflicted on the general population if they don't have the skills to do the job that they did. Okay, when I can't do this anymore, I'm going to go back to what I used to do and just cutting women's hair and be really happy. So we'll do that. So you want something to write about, which I think you should. Silence isn't an option for you aviation writers. If you keep quiet about it, it ensures that you're part of the problem. We need to raise an awareness on this. And I'll even give you a cheesy headline, and you can quote me or not, because you can probably write better than I can. Gold seal or no deal. If you can't keep an 80% pass rate, then you don't need to have a flight instructor certificate. Either get better or move out of the business. Okay. So what am I going to do about it? Because I've complained about it enough, so I'll say what I am and see if it works for you. Some have suggested if I stopped examining, the national pass rate would increase significantly. There may be some truth to that, but I think it would be statistically insignificant. As a matter of fact, you know, it is common for the applicant to be upset when they don't pass this check ride, and they go back, and after the DPE leaves, what does the flight school do? They blame the DPE, because who are they going to blame? Are you going to blame the CFI that trained you? Are you going to blame the flight school that took your money? No, it's easier to blame the guy or girl who just walked out the door. When in reality, I would bet you that the private pilot flight test you got in Maine is not going to be very much different than the one that you got in southern Arizona, okay? Maybe some nuances, but in reality, it's very scripted from the FAA, what you can talk about and what you can't talk about. And by the way, they hide the test in these things they call books. And it's called the ACS, and it tells you exactly what you're going to be tested on. And anybody ought to be able to develop some of their own scenario questions based on the data that you need to know. Okay? So it really isn't the DPE's fault. It's always easy to blame them, but it doesn't. So I'm going to give you some of my experiences over a good number of years doing this. We'll talk about the ground and the flight. First of all, let's talk about the ground. I'm often asked, which means I'm always asked, well, what are you going to ask on the test? Okay, now that seems like a kind of a lame question. You know, what questions are you going to ask me on the ground portion of the test? Well, it's not really the question that they're asking, because I always say, well, why do you ask? It turns out they give me an answer something like this. Well, there's just so much to know. I agree. The amount of information that is in all the flying handbooks and the ACS and the POH and all that stuff is tremendous. So let's assume that if you're smart enough to memorize the answer to 500-odd questions to pass the private pilot written test, you're probably smart enough to understand the very stuff that you need to fly in a practical way. So I'm going to give it to them. Okay? I'm going to give them that subset of information. Here's how I'm going to do it. I teach helicopters, or I did have a helicopter school, and had this product and called it Plastic Brains, because that's what we called it in the military. So it's a checklist, and if you open it up here and you ask me to teach you about the important points of retreating blade stall, I could go to my index, open it up, and I could give you a pretty good scripted lesson off these bullet points on what retreating blade stall is and how you could do it. I could even shove this in front of you, Eric, and I assure you that after about 10 minutes, even you would understand it, okay? So, do I have that script in my head? No, it's too complicated. There's a lot of information. But what I did is take the stuff that is important, like what's going to be on the test, and put it in the brain. So I'm just going to do that for airplanes, but a little differently. And in there, I'm going to include FARs for those who might need to use them, condensed subject areas, abbreviated flight test, and yes, 20 ways to fail your flight test, and a scenario workbook that's going to give you questions in a scenario way that you should be able to answer from the notes in your plastic brains. Okay. Let's talk about the FARs. The FARs are a problem in the U.S. because it's a very thick book, it's not written in plain English, and it doesn't cross-reference the other references that might amend the answer that you might choose to give the DPE on the test. So in this case, if you look at number 39, I've written it out in a way that's a simple statement. You cannot act as a safety pilot unless your pilot certificate allows you to fly the airplane as PIC, you have a current medical, and you have a current flight review. That's when you can be a safety pilot, okay? Now, on the next page or in the back, I list those references, so if you wanted to go look them up for yourself, there they are. So if for some reason you got stumped on a test and that was your bullet point answer, you have an instant reference about where you have to go to look at it, and we don't have to spend 20 minutes while I get 2 cups of coffee while you dig hopelessly through the FARs to find some kind of reference to support your answer. Okay? All right. Technical subjects. If I ask a CFI candidate, hey, and I do, by the way, hey, I'm confused about all these airspeeds. There's TAS, there's C. What does all that mean? Make sense of it to me. Okay? And I usually go get a cup of coffee, and I come back, and I'm still getting crickets. Absolutely nothing. So if you had some short notes, hey, here's how they all go out, you could probably put together a pretty good 3 or 4 minute elevator speech on what the airspeeds are. And if we had to go into more detail, you'd use your CFI skills to say, well, that's a really good question. We're going to do some more research, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay? But you'd have something to fall back on. They're simplified, they're abbreviated, and they're good talking points for you. Now, I also have some emphasis on some of the troubling topics out there, like airworthiness. I can give a flight test to almost anybody. When I talk about airworthiness, I'm not asking, hey, you know, when is the annual inspection due? When they say, well, the end of 12 months. That's not what I asked. I asked you when this annual inspection's due. Complete silence. Why? They learned the rote, 12 months. But they can't look at the book and apply that at the test, and this is the practical test. This is something you should be able to do every time you walk out to the airplane. And if not every time you walk out to the airplane, every time you walk out to the airplane on a flight test, you should do that. Okay? So I've given them an abbreviated checklist here. Hey, well, I need all the documents. I need this. It complies with type certificate, blah, blah, blah. It's a checklist. Oh, my God. It's a resource that you can use so you don't trip over your own tongue and say something that you are certainly going to regret later on. Okay, I may ask a question that has to do with airworthiness. How many times can you stop, drill, and crack? Okay, well, I don't know. Till it needs duct tape is clearly the answer in this flight school. So perhaps if somebody had asked them scenarios or said, hey, when you're looking at this airplane, you're doing the pre-flight and you're explaining to the DPE what's good and what's bad, maybe duct tape shouldn't be part of the maintenance manual. So if you bring this airplane to a flight school, then we're probably going to have to talk a little bit. Okay. Inoperative equipment is always a problem, so I'll give them another checklist. And by the way, if somebody would say it, and they haven't in years, okay, you give some piece of equipment, if they said all installed equipment must be operational unless it can be properly deferred. Well, that's the A+ answer. And you know, as DPEs, we don't always drill into a lot down deep. We start peeling the onion back, right? And if the first answer is pretty good, maybe I don't have to peel the onion back so far. If the first answer is AFU, then maybe I got to dig a little further in this onion to figure out what's the depth of your lack of knowledge here. And will it meet the minimum standards in the ACS? You're laughing, I know, because you've been there, right? So, yeah. So here's a checklist. So this checklist might actually help them out. Weight and balance continues to be an issue. It's a brand new problem in aviation, so we're still addressing it. I don't really understand that. There is this weight shift formula. Now, we talked about this being a practical test. I had to look this up and put it into my slides. I have not used this weight shift formula in the 49 years I've been flying, so I don't consider that should be part of a practical test. Because if I'm standing out on the ramp in Omaha and it's 20 below and it's snowing, excuse me, I have to use this later, so I screwed that up. If I have to stand out on the ramp in Omaha and it's 20 degrees below and another passenger shows up with another bag, I go, oh, here, let me whip out my weight shift formula. No, okay? That isn't the practical resource we should be using. Here's an idea. Use the one in ForeFlight and just redo it. But people don't understand that they can use that. It's a perfectly valuable resource. I don't care how you get the answer, okay? Look it up. Use your resources. Phone a friend. Walk around the building backwards 3 times. Whatever you need to do. But the first answer you give me is the one I'm going to take out of your mouth because that's probably the first one you would do in the airplane. So be careful what you say. Abbreviated flight, just go on right on through. We're having a presentation here, Bob. We'll see you a little bit later. Good for you. Yeah. All right. I've done some abbreviated flight tasks, and it's going to be in this format, a little different than the helicopter one. The blue is actually a color code. That's what the airplane flying handbook says about a short field takeoff. And then the green is what the ACS says about a short field handbook, or takeoff. And the red is what the pilot's operating handbook gives you as a procedure. Okay. The rest in black is technique. And by the way, feel free to throw that out and write your own techniques. This happens to be for a 172. The problem is you'd say, well, this seems like really simple stuff. Well, maybe to you it isn't, but it's not, okay? Many applicants fail because they don't really understand what they are trying to do, so how could they possibly be expected to do it to the standard? There I was, and it was just recently. So we did a soft field takeoff, and we're talking about it at the end of the flight, and I said, so I had a question about your soft field takeoff. And they go, yeah, what was that? And I go, well, first of all, the pilot's operating handbook says you're supposed to use 10 degrees. I mean, it's a procedure in the book. He chose not to use that. He goes, oh, no. Well, see, we don't use flaps if there's a crosswind. I go, oh, okay, well, yeah, I agree. There was a good 3-4 knot crosswind today. I understand that. Let's move on a little bit. You went down the runway. You may have pulled the yoke back a little bit, but the nose wheel came off, oh, I don't know, right around 60, and then you climbed at 60 in a 172. And I'm just curious what you were trying to do at this point. And the answer was, well, that's the way we do it in this school. Okay, well, somebody's got to intervene here and help them understand what they're trying to do and how to do it. And by the way, if you don't have some points about how to do that, okay, then how are you going to possibly do it? So I think a good instructor can do the background, which is the blue and the green, but when we get down to here, this is what you need to do with either your hands or your feet, and that's what matters in actually doing the maneuver. What do I do with my hands and feet to accomplish what's in the blue and the green? So I'll give them what you do with your hands and feet. Keep it simple. Now, 20 ways to fail. So I wrote this book, 20 ways to fail your flight test, a practical guide to earning your notice of disapproval. And I did it because it's kind of like, you know, a little bit of graveyard humor, I suppose. I was a paramedic in an inner city in New York for the 6 or 7 years I went to college. I was a slow learner, okay? And, you know, I had the night shift because obviously I had classes during the day, and we used to pick up a lot of, you know, deceased people. And after a while, you develop a certain sort of mortuary humor, and you're doing it to combat the fact that your job isn't all that much fun. Well, it isn't that much fun as a DP either, so sometimes, so I wrote it. And I gave it to somebody, and they said, well, it's a little sarcastic. And I was offended, a little. Clearly, I missed the mark, and I'm proving that it was, in fact, sarcastic. Okay. It was never about the rote. Okay, the rote is easy. You can get that anywhere. It was about the rhythm of the test. Okay, taking a practical test has its own nuances in it. So without the rhythm, it's like knowing a dance step, but nothing else. And I know that's a little obtuse, so I'm going to get some volunteers to help me figure this out. Will and Kyle, would you come forward, please? Yeah, you. Don't sit back there. Come on, hurry up. Everybody's waiting on their cookies. Let's go. I usually pick somebody from the audience. It would have been you two guys, so you can thank them later on, okay? Okay. You guys are going to learn the waltz. Have you done a lot of ballroom dancing? A lot? That was Kyle? Okay. So someone has to be a leader, someone has to be the follower. So eeny, meeny, miny, you're the leader, you're the follower. Okay, so you're the girl. Stand over here. You guys stand this way so the audience can see you. Okay, this is really going to be simple. It's only 3 steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, okay? If we get complicated, we can do 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3. But we won't have to do that right now. It's just like walking, okay? It's going to be easy. It's just like walking. Trust me, I got you on this. Me and Big Louie won the talent contest in cell block C 2 years running, all right? It was 2 to 4, but good behavior, so.
Good for me.
Okay, it's good for you, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You got that? Okay, so the road is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You're going to step forward first with your left foot. You're going to step backwards first with your right foot. And that's all there is to it, okay? So stay right there for a second. You notice how I use that magic CFI stuff? Association. It's going to be easy. It's just like walking. When we know it's not, okay? It's not going to be at all. And I also said, hey, it's going to be easy. So I predispositioned them to think it's going to work. And we all know that it's going to be a cluster, okay? For you, it's going to be like pushing a walrus backwards on a beach. That's like, no offense, okay? To the walrus. But the point is, that's what it's going to be like. Okay, so let's talk about the connection. So you guys come together. I know, a little stage fright, a little homophobia. Come on, let's go. Okay, so you're, no. What are you, in high school? Come on, I'm going to show you. Put your hand up here. You put your hand there, okay? Now grasp it. There you go. That's your left-hand connection, okay? You're going to put this hand around his waist in a minute. Don't stop now. I need you to put your hand here, and I need you to tense this elbow. If you don't tense this elbow, you don't create a dance space. And every time he steps forward, he's going to hit your chest. Okay, and after a while, it's going to become deliberate, and it's just not right. Okay, it's just rude. Okay. Okay. So you're going to keep a good stiff thing here, and you're going to keep a thing here. So now I want you to do, I just want you to take one, oh, this goes around his waist. Okay, gently. Okay, first date. Now, we have to talk about where you're going to look. Okay, Will? One, you can look into his eyes and with that goofy, will I get lucky tonight look. I don't recommend it. Okay? Or option two is you can look down at your feet. There's two things really wrong with that. First of all, it's just a high school, pathetic attempt to look at his chest. And two, you really ought to know where your feet are by now. I'm just saying, okay? I mean, unless you're that guy who like 2 times a day walks around, guys, you startled me, where you been? No, okay, you should know that. So I just want you to make the first one. So you start out with your left foot, you step back with your right. That's one, stop. Now do it again. Do it again with, no, not, I'm sorry, that was my bad instruction. Let me correct that. Okay, I didn't have a simulator. Okay, left foot, right foot, one and stop. Okay, now you're going to do right foot, you're going to step back with your left foot. That's 2, and now repeat number 1 with thing. Okay, perfect. Okay, good. Now we need some music. So let's get that going, okay? This is really going to work out. Trust me. Hey, no, get back in the stance here. All right, let's see what we got here. I picked some stuff up. All right. All right, we can do this. This will work. All right, I'm going to count this for you, okay? Don't start right away. I'll work on it here for you. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Don't let the words confuse you, okay? Just listen to the music. Don't get confused because somebody's, you know what? Stop that. That's more at the commercial level. Let's go back to something a little slower. Okay. By the way, before this starts, this is Nora Jones. I want props from the ladies in the audience that I even know who that is. Okay, you ready? I'll count this for you. 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1. Now don't get confused for the extra notes she's putting in there, okay? Just listen to the basic music. Are you ready? 2, 3. Ready?
What are we doing?
You're leading. Just go straight down that way. Don't hit anything. 1, 2, 3. 2, 2, 3. Come away with me tonight. Don't look at his face. All right, let's give Kyle and Will a big hand. All right, it seems funny. But did you get that watching an episode of Happy Days Awkwardness in the pit of your stomach watching that? Okay. Well, after you do a couple hundred flight tests and you watch people squirm like that, you wonder, how can I help these people possibly understand that there is a way to proceed on the flight test? Okay. So, to do the flight test, you need to know how to clarify vague questions without actually appearing like you don't know the answer, which you don't. But there are techniques that you can use to dig yourself out of that, okay? When to use your resources. I often ask a question, like a systems question, and they'll say, hey, they'll go on and go on and go on, and they'll just be completely lost, and I'll ask, is there a checklist for that? That's one of those rhetorical questions, by the way, because I know full well there's a checklist, or I wouldn't have asked it. But they never thought to use the checklist as their resource. For whatever reason, somebody told them you're not supposed to do that on a flight test, when clearly that's exactly what they should be doing, okay? I flew an airplane once that the emergency procedures checklist was bigger than the whole POH in a citation. Now, would you be expected to memorize all that? No, how could you possibly do that? So that's why they have it for you in the airplane so you can use it. By the way, that guy who was talking earlier, every time I flew this airplane, I accounted for 78% of the Jet A fuel usage in the United States, okay, on every single flight. Thank you. Okay. You need to know what never to say on a flight test, and I talk about that in the book. And you need to know when to discontinue. It ought to be clear to you that this isn't going well, and you have the opportunity at any point, as long as you don't have any unanswered questions on the table, to say, I'm done for today. What's it cost you? Maybe a little cash, but that's it. And even if you don't have your ducks in a row, at least you know where your ducks are. Okay? And that's a big step in a check ride, because when you don't know how to get to the answer and you don't even know where to look for the answer, well, you've typically written your own notice of disapproval at that point, and there's really nothing we can do to help you out of it. So, I also have a scenario workbook where I give scenario-based questions. So if somebody's taking a private pilot ride, I may ask, and when I say I may, I ask it on every single private pilot test. And my POI, who I've had for 20 years, says, when are you going to change your questions? I said, I don't know, Frank. When they get the answer right, okay, I'll change the question. But the question is, you're going to be piloting Commander Day carrying me as a passenger. That's actually true. It's a true scenario. What requirements do you have to meet as the pilot in order to do that? Now, that's a question you ask yourself every single time you go out and fly. And I'll see a lot of fumbling, and they'll flip through some notes, and there's a whole bunch of color-coded tabs in the FAR aim, and they'll be rustling through those, but the answer is, well, I need my pilot certificate. Well, that's true, but the answer is woefully thin. So that may be an opportunity where they would go to their plastic brains and say, well, that's easy. I need my certificates, my documents, I need currency, and I need proficiency. That last one's important because you're showing me that I know something about risk management, which is a really important part of the ACS. Okay, those are the 4 bullet points that can get you through that question. The rest of it you can derive through research if you had to. Okay. And it's the #1 reason that people aren't prepared for the ground portion of the flight test. They know the route, but they don't know how to apply it in a scenario because nobody's ever tasked them to do it before. So you should be able to answer with this product. And who's the target audience for this? Well, private or commercial applicants who want to focus on the key points and have an easy reference to dig themselves out of the hole that they've made for themselves. Okay? You get an opportunity to rescind your answer. To the best of my recollection, Senator, I'd like to take that answer back. Okay? You can do that. Sometimes halfway through the test, after we've gone through and they've said something stupid early on, they come back and they say, and the light comes on. I want to change my first answer. Okay, what'd you like to change it to? Okay, perfectly fine with that. Doug's not, but I'm not. I'm okay with it. All right. And it may be for a CFI applicant who wants instant lesson plans, because I can't tell you how many initial CFI tests I've done, and they've been given the advice that the only thing that they're going to be asked on technical subject areas is the lesson that they had to prepare. What? Okay? If that were the case, it wouldn't take 6 hours. Trust me. Okay? So you ask them a question, they have no references, what do? They fail. Okay? All right. Now, why should anyone care what I think about this? Well, that's a good question. So here's the back of all my things, right? I got a lot of certificates. By the way, that one is, oddly enough, that one in the lower right corner, I'm also a commercial Jamaican pilot. That's a long story. We'd have to tell that in private, not on public stuff. Okay. So I got a lot of stuff on the back of my green cards, and I've taken a lot of check rides in the military, and I've never failed one. Luck? Maybe. Statistically improbable, I would say, but maybe there's a good degree of luck on it. But I've also had the opportunity to see a lot of training programs in the military and in civil aviation. The test you take for your ATP seaplane is a little bit different than the one you'll take for your ATP land plane. And how do you maximize that? Okay? What's the way that you can get yourself through those kinds of things? I've been examining for more than 25 years, and I've given lots of tests. I don't really know how many, but I would have to safely say over 1,000, probably, maybe more. I don't keep track of it. Okay, and I've endorsed a lot of applicants for tests, over 600, and none of them have ever failed a test. Lucky? Maybe. Statistically improbable, I would say. But what this does show, and this is the self-promotion that I'm doing, and then I'll stop, is I think I know how to prepare and how to pass a practical test. So these are my ideas. They may not be Doug's, they may not be yours, but they're mine, okay? Use them or not. Okay, I'm just saying. Okay, that was the self-promotion part, by the way, unless you didn't catch it. Okay. Have you checked that prescription lately? Because you're, okay, I'm just checking. How much will it cost? I don't know. It'll be beyond pricey, just short of outlandish. Why? Well, here's why. I used to give it away, and apparently it wasn't of any value. I was testing some Army helicopter pilots, and I had some information out, and I said, here, you can buy this for $10. This is how you get through your airplane ratings for $10. What did they do? They took the copy and they copied it, and then they brought it to the check writing copies. Right? I'm the one who wrote it, and they bring a Xerox copy. So I said, oh, well, that's interesting. They give an answer. What's your reference for that? And he says, right here. All right. let me peel that onion back a little further. One, you owe me 20 bucks for the for what you didn't pay me for. And two, we can talk about this on your woefully insignificant preparation. Okay. All right. Now there I was. This was important to me because I really had a lot of empathy for this person. She had gone through our flight school at San Marcos. She's gotten her private, and then she had done the multi in our Seminoles, and she's an aviation writer, and she says, hey, I finally got to get my CFI. What do I need to do to prepare? So we spent about an hour, and I talked to her about this is what you need to do. This is how you need to get your notes together. I don't call them lesson plans because that becomes formal in people's mind. You just see some notes, like the things you've seen here. Get some bullet points on each of the topic. If you get more than 4 bullet points on each topic, you really ought to think about whether you're saying too much. Okay? Get those narrowed down. So 6 months later, she came back. I asked her a question about airworthiness. Crickets. I was disappointed, and I said, okay, so obviously that's not going to be successful at the CFI level, not to know anything about airworthiness or even mention airworthiness directives as part of airworthiness of an airplane. And I said, I don't understand. I mean, we went over this, and she said, well, but my instructor said that I didn't need to know that. All I needed to know was this. So I said, okay. So then we talked about where we go from here. And by the way, for those of you who don't really know, most of us DPEs, when our test is not successful, we spend more time debriefing and trying to help people get to the next stage to pass their test than we probably did on the test. Okay? Because we're all instructors first at heart. So we spend a lot of time, no charge, to say, this is what I would recommend you do to get ready to go. Okay? So I was a little disappointed that this hadn't happened, but silently I'm thinking, well, let me see this. Your instructor, who has about 300 hours, told you to do this. I have 3 times the number of successful flight tests recommendations than he does flying hours, and you're going to listen to him. Why? So I wanted to peel that onion back and figure out why, and the answer is that was the route at that institution with that instructor, and the assume was, hey, they're going to go away. And were there any consequences to the instructor? None. Okay? None whatsoever. So what is their motivation to get better? Well, okay. That was the self-promotion part 2. How many do I plan to sell? Honestly, I don't care. The work's already done. It just has to be reformatted. If I don't sell any, that's fine. Okay? That's the sort of self-promotion. Really don't care if you buy it or not. If you think it would be helpful, buy it. If not, don't buy it. Okay? When will it be available? Well, soon. Certainly by Oshkosh, as soon as I get the RV8 painted, but it'll be there. Okay? By AirVenture. And I want to be serious about this. Just because I wrote it, I'm not the smartest person in the room when it comes to aviation, but I'm usually the smartest person in the room when it comes to aviation, present in the room during the test. So I can probably figure out what it is you should have said and help you get there before you say the wrong thing. Okay? So my qualification is that I'm the smartest guy in the room, usually giving the test. Will the product help you people? I don't know. If they test with me, it's going to help a whole lot. Okay? Maybe if they test with Doug or somebody else, it'll be helpful too, because they'll understand the way they need to condense their information and then build upon that with other knowledge and little crib notes and everything else. Maybe it will. Okay? If nothing else, this is what I can do right now to improve customer satisfaction. Okay? I lost a slide there, and we had a little glitch where the power went off. Did I push that? Probably. But he's working on it. Okay. That was probably, I induced that, so I'll take a hit for that. But let's talk about something else while we're doing that. See, this is my way of deferring the thing when I don't have any control over what's happening next, So what are you really asking me is this, right? Get a lot of that on the flight test. We'll talk about that too. So somebody you'll ask a question, it's scenario-based, and they say, well, like a multi-engine, they'll say, well, is what you're saying the gear didn't come down? I said, no, these are the picture of the lights that you have. What are you going to do? So the gear's not coming down. I go, I didn't say that. You said that. Look at the lights. Tell me what you would do when you see this indication. That's the practical part. Oh, okay, so the gear didn't come down, right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do this, this, and this. And I go, and what are the questions I'm always going to ask at that point, Doug? You got a checklist for that? Did they answer it? No. What did they do? They assumed that in this scenario, this was going to be the outcome. And without ever looking at the checklist, they went from point A to point 32 because they made the assumption this was the outcome. Quite frankly, I don't know what the outcome's going to be. It depends on if you use the checklist or not to solve it. And if you don't use the checklist correctly, I know what the outcome's going to be, okay? But it didn't. Okay, can we do that or not, or do we just take a break? Okay, so here's the thing. 25% failure rate is a disgrace. It's a disgrace to the industry, and it's a disgrace to every professional instructor in here. We need to do something about it. Awareness, and we need to make sure that people are being routinely reevaluated to ensure that they can produce that product. And I would say that every other renewal by taking a flight with a DPE isn't going to be all that much to ask for the privileges that you hold on that certificate and the responsibility that you take. Now, where will this be available? Well, it'll be available through Redbird because I'm not making it available to the general public because my feelings are this. If you're not using advanced simulation in your training, i.e. Redbird customers, you've got problems so big I can't even begin to solve them, okay? Because there's an old adage, okay? Artificial intelligence can never overcome natural stupidity. So that's all I have to say. Now's the time to applaud.